was passed, and that's clearly what the court said. Yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to suggest that somehow this is all about perpetuating racism. It's about perpetuating the harms that clearly existed, as the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina made very clear in his review of the history of what the Jim Crow South actually looked like. And listening now to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I saw this happen and unfold in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where my friend Mike Lee was engaging with Senator Durbin, talking about Jim Crow 2.0. And I was just on the floor of the House of Representatives, and we were talking about D.C. statehood, and we're hearing the same thing about Jim Crow 2.0, and we're talking about comparing the historic wrongs that occurred that this country worked hard to reform and fix, that the Voting Rights Act was so critical in doing in 1965. We're being compared now to passing laws trying to make sure our election system can be believed and trusted, and that voter identification can be used, and that mail-in ballots have bipartisan agreement that they have higher rates of fraud, that maybe we should do something to ensure that we have trust and belief in those mail-in ballots. The record, when we put it in at the time in 2006, it is really important for people to note that when the Voting Rights Act was adopted, the average registration rate for black voters in the 7 original covered states was only 29.3%. Today, that was 2006, the voter registration rate among blacks, for example, in covered jurisdictions is over 68%, higher than the 62% found in non-covered jurisdictions. There was examples where the counties in Florida, where there were covered counties and non-covered counties. Interestingly, we noted in the submission, while Florida has 5 counties that are subject to Section 5 coverage, none of these counties were implicated by the accounts of discrimination submitted to the record in 2006. Yet there were 5 non-covered counties in Florida that were pointed out in the list of accounts that was produced in the record in 2006. All of this is arbitrary. Everything that is being done is arbitrary, and that's why the court kicked it out. That's the fact, and that's what we know. Now what do we have? The legislation being put forward now for voting rights authorization and expansion counts any change to a state's voter ID law as a mark against it. 36 states already have voter ID laws. That's what's being done. It's very specific. It's very purposeful. That's what's actually happening. Voting Rights Act punishes states for improving the processes they use to clean up and maintain accurate voting rolls. They're making that an actual element, and they're trying to compare that, making sure that voting rolls, which have currently massive numbers of dead people registered, people who aren't in date, people who have moved, where you can't have faith in the voting rolls, somehow that is going to be made equivalent to the Jim Crow South, for which the Voting Rights Act was so important in 1965. And it undermines the Voting Rights Act to suggest, as Senator Durbin did, that if you oppose Section 5 preclearance and you opposed the absurdity of basing Section 5 preclearance on 40-year-old data, that somehow you're against the Voting Rights Act. That's what happens. Those are the political talking points. And I would just ask our witness and governor from North Carolina if you could help me understand. Was the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution passed and moved by Republicans or Democrats? Right. And was the movement to, put your microphone on, sir.
That would be Republicans.
Was the move for the 64 Civil Rights Act and 65 Voting Rights Act led heavily by Republicans or Democrats?
That would be Republicans.
And so as we sit here today, and as we're being accused by many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle of wanting to somehow perpetuate the Jim Crow South, when in fact what we're trying to do is perpetuate laws that you can believe in, that you've so eloquently discussed, do you see any merit in that whatsoever?
Absolutely not. And just if I have a moment just to add something. When you talk about that history is clear. Who stood on which side at every turn in history. It is clear. It's not even in dispute. And it's not in dispute now. What we want is integrity. We don't want power. We want integrity.
Hallelujah.
We want the right thing to be done. We want to encourage citizens to be responsible. We want to have the best election system in the world. In the world.
In the world.
Third world countries, places like India where the poverty rate is staggering. They have to show that finger when they go vote. It's time that we modernize our election system in this country and stop playing all these silly games based on race. And please, stop using me as a black man as your pawn. Yes, I said it. Push your agenda. I'm sick of it. It happened a long time ago in this country, and I'm tired.
Chairman, I would ask that the witness answer the question.
His time has expired.
Mr. Chairman,
He answered it. She just didn't like the answer.
Mr. Chairman, I should have a unanimous consent request to insert something in the record.
Yeah, well, he
Unanimous
just
consent to insert some in the record.
Consent request.
doesn't have a mic on.
You've already said that we could enter that in the record. You said it in your opening, Mr. Chairman. What changed?
Johnson, can you hear me?
No one can hear you.
So we're not going to insert something in the record.
So Republicans
Recognized for
can't enter
5
anything in the record. I'm
So
just
the
need
chairman
clarification.
doesn't want us to be able to insert stuff in the record?
Maybe in a few minutes, but not right now.
Oh, because when I had my time closing, I didn't want to insert it at the time inserted when I spoke.
Mr. Johnson, we're going to go in proper order. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, this is a great way to run a hearing. Impressive.
What's wrong?
I think Mr. Johnson's video is frozen.
I think Mr. Cohen's flustered.
Ms. Garcia, can you hear me?
Man, speaking the truth over here.
I guess you can't. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses who have joined us today. It is